ballroom shimmered with a kind of brilliance that could blind a person who wasn't used to it. Golden chandeliers sparkled above like suspended constellations, bathing the marble floor in waves of soft light. The sound of laughter and polished shoes echoed through the grand hall, mingling with the clinking of champagne glasses and the gentle hum of a live string quartet. Guests in glittering gowns and tailored suits floated across the room like a parade of royalty, their conversations laced with compliments, gossip, and hidden rivalries. It was the kind of evening that had been designed not just for celebration, but for spectacle, a place where appearances meant everything, and every smile carried the weight of 100 secrets. Ethan Walker stepped into that glittering world with the quiet grace of a man who no longer needed to prove himself. Though surrounded by generations of wealth and legacy, he stood apart, not because he tried to, but because he had earned his place differently. Unlike most of the men shaking hands and raising glasses in the hall, Ethan hadn't been born into this life. His fortune wasn't old money polished by ancestors, but built from nothing. From nights of long work, clever risks, and relentless ambition. It was a truth whispered about in corners with equal parts admiration and envy. Some respected him deeply for it. Others merely tolerated his presence because his wealth reveled, and in some cases surpassed theirs. Tonight, however, Ethan wasn't thinking about business. He wasn't thinking about the stocks, the deals, or the endless phone calls that usually defined his days. Tonight, he was here for one reason: to celebrate the woman who would soon be his wife, Vanessa Kingsley. Even her name carried a certain weight in this room. The Kingsleys had been in society's spotlight for generations, their fortune so deeply embedded into history that no one quite remembered where it had begun. Vanessa was the perfect picture of that legacy. Tall, elegant, with features so striking they seemed carved rather than born, she commanded attention simply by existing. Her golden gown shimmered, as though woven from sunlight, each movement catching the light and holding it like a secret. She smiled with practiced perfection, laughed just loud enough to charm, and touched arms with the right amount of familiarity to make every man in the room wish he were in Ethan's shoes. From the outside, it was a match made in heaven. The self-made millionaire and the princess of old money, united in what promised to be a merger not just of hearts, but of worlds. But as Ethan moved through the crowd, something in his chest tightened, though he couldn't yet put his finger on it. Perhaps it was the way Vanessa's laughter sounded rehearsed, or the way she seemed more interested in being seen than being present. He brushed the thought aside. Tonight wasn't the time for doubts. He mingled politely, shaking hands, exchanging words, but his mind wasn't fully engaged. His eyes kept drifting to Vanessa as she floated from one conversation to another, her charm spilling over like champagne in a glass filled to the brim. Ethan admired her beauty, yes, but he also studied her carefully, with the quiet eyes of a man who had learned to watch more than he spoke. There was something behind the smile, a sharpness that only surfaced in fleeting glances, quickly buried beneath practiced grace. After nearly an hour of polite conversations and endless small talk, Ethan excused himself. He told the guests he needed a breath of fresh air, but really, he needed space to think. He slipped away from the ballroom, moving through one of the side corridors that led away from the noise. The silence was immediate, like stepping into another world. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The polished marble walls and gold, trimmed doors stretched ahead of him, the hum of the party fading into a distant echo. That's when he heard it. A muffled voice, sharp and cold, cutting through the quiet. It came from deeper down the corridor, near the service wing where the staff usually moved in and out, unseen by the glittering guests. Ethan paused. He wasn't the type to eavesdrop, But something in that voice pulled him forward. It wasn't the kind of voice that belonged in a celebration. It was the voice of cruelty. He followed the sound carefully, his footsteps silent against the marble. The voices grew clearer. At first, he thought it might have been one of the older socialites, snapping at a waiter. That wasn't uncommon in gatherings like this, though it always made him sick. But when he rounded the corner, the sight that greeted him made his stomach knot. There, in the narrow hallway lit only by wall sconces, stood Vanessa. But it wasn't the Vanessa who had been smiling moments ago in the ballroom. Her face was twisted, sharp with disdain, her eyes cold as steel. She towered over a young maid, Maria, who was clutching a stained napkin, her face pale with fear. The crimson of spilled wine marked the white fabric she held, the evidence of some small mistake that should have been brushed aside. But instead of patience or even a simple reprimand, Vanessa was lashing out like a whip. Pathetic girl. Vanessa sneered, her voice dripping with venom. Do you think anyone cares if you make mistakes? You're nothing here. Nothing. You'll never be more than a servant. People like me. We own people like you. Maria flinched as if the words themselves struck her. Her lips trembled, but no sound came out. She stood frozen, tears threatening to fall, her knuckles white as she clutched the ruined napkin. She didn't dare defend herself. She didn't dare move. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He stared frozen in disbelief. The woman he had promised to marry. The woman the world believed to be the very image of grace and elegance, was standing there, tearing down someone who could not defend herself. The cruelty in her voice cut deeper than any mistake Maria had made. Ethan felt the air around him grow heavy, the illusion of perfection shattering with every word Vanessa spat. Vanessa wasn't finished. She took a step closer to the trembling maid, her voice lowering into something even more venomous. Do you see these people in there? She hissed, gesturing vaguely toward the ballroom. Every single one of them is worth 1,000 of you. You're invisible. You're replaceable. If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. Maria's eyes welled with tears, but she bit her lip, holding them back. Ethan's chest tightened with anger and something else. Disappointment so sharp it hurt. For a moment, he couldn't move. He wanted to storm forward, to stop this, but something kept him rooted to the spot. He realized it was disbelief. He needed to see, needed to be sure this wasn't a single cruel moment, a misunderstanding. He needed to see the truth of who Vanessa really was, when the world wasn't watching. And the truth was unfolding before him in the ugliest way. Vanessa reached down, snatching the soiled napkin from Maria's hands. With a cold smile, she tossed it back into the girl's face. Clean it up properly this time. And for heaven's sake, try not to embarrass yourself again. Or maybe I'll just have to speak to Ethan about replacing you. Ethan felt his fists clench at his sides. The words echoed in his ears, replace you, as if human beings were nothing more than broken tools to be discarded. Maria bent down quickly, too quickly, trying to gather the napkin, her hands shaking so badly that she dropped it again. She mumbled an apology, her voice barely audible. Vanessa rolled her eyes with a dramatic sigh, the kind she used when mocking someone who wasn't worth her time. Ethan took a step forward, his presence still unnoticed by either of them. His jaw tightened, his breath deepened. The sight of Maria trembling on the floor, while Vanessa stood above her, like a queen delivering judgment, was burned into his mind. In that instant, the glittering chandeliers, the champagne, the music, all of it faded away. None of it mattered, because what he saw in front of him was the unmasking of a person he thought he knew. The truth was darker, crueler, and it made his blood boil. The woman he had chosen as his future stood there with no kindness, no compassion, no humanity. And Ethan Walker, the man who had built his empire on respect, integrity, and treating people fairly. Realized he might have just made the biggest mistake of his life. Ethan didn't step forward immediately. For a moment, he stood in the shadow of the corridor, his figure hidden from the glow of the wall sconces. His eyes were fixed on the scene before him, and though every part of his being wanted to rush forward and put an end to the cruelty, he forced himself to wait. He wanted to see who Vanessa was when she thought no one important was watching. He wanted to know the truth without the mask, without the polished smile that had charmed everyone in that ballroom, including him. What he saw in those few seconds was enough to make his chest ache with a mixture of anger and betrayal. Vanessa, oblivious to his presence, continued her tirade. She took a half step forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Maria, still bent low, tried to clean the floor where drops of wine had fallen, but her trembling hands made the task almost impossible. Vanessa snatched the napkin out of her grasp once more, holding it between two fingers, as if it were a piece of filth. "You're hopeless," she spat, throwing it back down. "I can't believe Ethan tolerates incompetence like yours. Honestly, it embarrasses me to even see you here, ruining the atmosphere." The way she said Ethan's name, his name, made his stomach twist. She wielded it like a weapon, using his authority as a shield for her cruelty, as if he would ever condone humiliating someone for a simple mistake. Maria whispered something, her voice so faint it was almost drowned by the sound of the distant music from the ballroom. "I'm sorry, Miss Kingsley. Please, it won't happen again." The apology only seemed to fuel Vanessa's disdain. She let out a sharp laugh, a sound that cut through the air like glass breaking. "Of course it won't. Because I won't let it. People like you need to understand your place. You serve, you stay silent, and you never forget who is above you. That's how this world works." Ethan's jaw tightened until it hurt. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, to end this nightmare unfolding before his eyes. And yet, he let it go on a moment longer, because part of him needed the confirmation, needed to see that this wasn't some passing fit of temper, but a reflection of Vanessa's true nature. He had learned in business that people reveal their real selves not in meetings or public appearances, but in how they treated those who could do nothing for them. And what he was seeing right now made his blood boil. Then came the breaking point. Vanessa bent down, close enough that Maria flinched back in fear. Her voice dropped to a hiss, dripping with poison. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you." Maria's wide tear-filled eyes lifted, meeting Vanessa's cold, hard gaze. She was caught like a rabbit before a hawk. "You're nothing," Vanessa whispered, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "If you disappeared tomorrow, no one would remember your name. Not one person in that ballroom would care." It was too much. Ethan stepped forward, his footsteps no longer silent, the weight of his presence filling the corridor. His voice, calm yet edged with steel, broke the air like a crack of thunder. "No, Vanessa," he said, his tone commanding enough to make both women freeze. "That's not true." Vanessa whipped around, her eyes wide in shock, her face paling as she saw him standing there. In an instant, the venom vanished from her expression, replaced by a mask of feigned surprise and innocence. "Ethan," she gasped, straightening her posture as though she had merely been caught off guard in polite conversation. "I didn't see you there. I was just..." But Ethan's eyes weren't on her. They were on Maria, who stood trembling, clutching the napkin again as though it were a lifeline. Her cheeks were wet with tears she hadn't wanted to shed, her shoulders hunched in shame. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight, and his anger rose like a tide. "You were just what?" Ethan asked, his gaze shifting slowly to Vanessa. His voice was calm, but it carried an undercurrent of fury that made even Vanessa falter. teaching her a lesson. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. She spilled wine, Ethan. In the middle of an important evening. I was simply making sure she understood the seriousness of. Of what? Ethan's voice sharpened, his words cutting through her excuses. Of being human. Of making a mistake anyone could make. Tell me, Vanessa, was it necessary to speak to her like that? To humiliate her? To make her cry? The silence that followed was heavy. Maria shook her head slightly, desperate to protect herself from further conflict. Sir, she whispered, her voice trembling, please don't be upset. It was my fault. I should have been more careful. Ethan turned to her, his expression softening instantly. His voice lowered, gentler now, but still firm. Maria, don't apologize for being treated unfairly. You don't deserve that. Maria's lips parted, but no words came. She blinked rapidly, as though she couldn't quite believe what she had heard. No one had ever said such a thing to her before. Not in this house. Not in this world where she was invisible. Vanessa's shock was quickly morphing into panic. She stepped forward, her hand brushing Ethan's arm, her voice adopting a tone of urgent sweetness. Darling, you don't understand. These people. Ethan's words snapped like a whip, making her flinch. Do you hear yourself? You're talking about human beings, Vanessa. Human beings who deserve respect. People who make it possible for this house, this event, even your perfect evening to exist at all. And you treat them as if they're beneath you. A faint shuffle of movement caught Ethan's attention. Down the corridor, a few members of the staff had gathered, drawn by the voices they'd heard. They stood at a respectful distance, their eyes wide, uncertain whether they should stay or retreat. Ethan noticed the way they looked at Maria with pity, then at Vanessa with something closer to fear. They hadn't expected to be seen, but now they were witnesses. Vanessa noticed them too. Her composure cracked further. Ethan, please, she whispered, her voice low but frantic. You're humiliating me, in front of them. Do you know what this will look like? Yes, Ethan said, his voice like stone. It will look like the truth. His words echoed in the narrow corridor, carrying the weight of finality. For the first time since he'd met her, Vanessa looked truly rattled. The mask of elegance had slipped completely, leaving behind only the raw edges of pride and fear. Maria tried once again to take the blame, her voice barely audible. Sir, please, don't let this ruin your evening. Miss Kingsley was just upset. I'll be more careful, I promise. But Ethan raised a hand, silencing her gently. Maria, he said, his tone firm but filled with something protective. You don't need to protect anyone who treats you with cruelty. Not ever. Maria froze, her wide eyes locked on him, her lips trembling with words she couldn't form. For the first time, she felt like someone had seen her. Not as a maid, not as a servant, but as a person. Vanessa's voice cut through the silence, rising in desperation. Ethan, are you really going to take her side? Over me? Your fiancé? The question hung in the air like a challenge. It was more than just words. It was a demand, a plea, and a threat all rolled into one. Vanessa's voice trembled with disbelief. She couldn't fathom that Ethan, the man who had promised her a future, would stand against her for someone she considered so far beneath them both. Ethan's silence stretched on, heavier than any argument. His eyes, steady and unflinching, moved from Maria's tear-streaked face to Vanessa's panicked one. And in that silence, everyone in the corridor, every staff member watching, Maria trembling in her apron, Vanessa with her desperate mask, knew that something had shifted. And then Ethan spoke the words that changed everything.